A young, impoverished black mother clutches her little daughter tightly, battling exhaustion, prejudice, and the fear of the world turning its back on her. As her baby's cries intensify, every gaze in the cabin feels heavier, and she teeters on the brink of giving up, until a miracle appears in the most unexpected place. On the shoulder of a well-dressed man she doesn't even know, a famous CEO renowned for his compassion. In that brief moment between darkness and helplessness, the fates of these three strangers intersect, opening a story full of emotion and surprise, one that transcends the boundaries of race, poverty, and societal judgment. But when the little girl drifts to sleep on that stranger's shoulder, neither she nor her mother could have imagined that the truth waiting on the other side would leave them both stunned and change their lives forever. The sharp, piercing wail of a baby shatters the fragile quiet of the cramped airplane cabin. Lily's cries, this 6-month-old biracial child, rise and fall like a blaring alarm, drowning out even the engine's low hum outside the window. Weary faces snap around, eyes filled with annoyance, discomfort, and a hint of pity, all zeroing in on one young mother wedged between rows of seats, Amara Johnson. Amara strains to hold Lily close, her arms shaking from fatigue, her fingers numb after nearly 5 continuous hours of holding her daughter. 36 hours without sleep, 2 shifts at a diner, and a mad dash to the airport have drained her body and spirit. Her breathing is ragged, her chest tight, each beat of her heart matching the growing volume of Lily's cries. Every sob feels like a knife to Amara's soul, pushing her further toward despair. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, everyone," Amara almost whispers, her voice thick with shame and exhaustion. Each apology only makes the atmosphere heavier. A few passengers sigh, others scowl. A woman above her yanks her mask over her face, shooting Amara an unabashedly judgmental look. Someone quietly raises a phone to record this helpless mother and her crying child, likely to post on social media as an example of poor manners in public. Whispered murmurs ripple through the cabin, snippets like, "If you can't calm your kid, don't fly," or, "Bet she's a single mom who doesn't know how to raise her child." The harder Amara tries to soothe Lily, the more she feels every glare, as a sharp needle piercing through her thin shirt, crowding her from all sides. She wonders if anyone here has ever had to raise a child alone, stayed up all night holding a sobbing baby in a rundown room. Or do they see her only as a nuisance, a blot on the peace and quiet they paid for? Under the dim yellow cabin lights, Amara's face grows paler by the second. Her red-rimmed eyes shine with both despair and a shame she cannot voice. Her hands tremble with tension as she looks down at Lily. Her daughter's face is flushed, tears streaming down those tiny cheeks. In that moment, loneliness washes over Amara, making her feel utterly abandoned in midair, surrounded by hundreds of people, yet not a single sympathetic glance. Amid that sea of strangers under the cold night sky, Amara Johnson silently prays for a small miracle, something to quiet Lily's cries, something to keep her from collapsing right here, before this fateful flight reaches its end. Under the pale yellow lights and the stifling atmosphere of the airplane cabin, just as Amara was clinging to her faint hope for a miracle, the storm arrived in its cruelest form. The tension in the air, already thick, grew even heavier with the arrival of Mrs. Thompson, the head flight attendant. She was a 50-something woman whose face was etched with years of night flights and sleeplessness. Those countless hours had carved stern lines into her features, lines that only seemed to make her more closed off, strict, and impatient. Stepping toward Amara, Mrs. Thompson didn't bother hiding her irritation. The sound of her low-heeled shoes clicking sharply on the carpet felt like every step was pressing Amara deeper into her fear. Leaning forward, she lowered her voice, but there was nothing gentle about it. Please, keep the baby quiet so everyone else can rest. If this isn't resolved, I'll have to ask you to change seats or to move your child to the back of the cabin." Before Amara could even begin to respond, Mrs. Thompson shot a hard glance around the cabin, as if seeking allies to bolster her authority, and then walked away with an icy look that left a cold ache in Amara's chest. All she could do was mumble an apology, the lump of guilt and helplessness lodged painfully in her throat. Just then, a gruff male voice cut in from across the aisle, drawing a sharp line between normal passengers and annoyances. "Why don't you just stay home and take care of your kid? What are you doing bringing a baby on a plane and making everyone else miserable?" It was Mr. Walter, a middle-aged businessman wearing a silver-gray tie, whose eyes were already squinting in annoyance. He spoke loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. His mocking laugh sliced through Amara's already fragile pride like a dull knife. A few other passengers nodded in agreement. A young woman pretended to place earbuds in her ears, but the smirk on her face betrayed her contempt. Any sympathy that might have existed was drowned out by the cold, even cruel reactions of the majority. Amara felt her heart pound in her chest, her hands tightening around Lily until the baby squirmed in discomfort. There was nowhere to hide from those insults, and no way to defend herself when every stare labeled her as a problem to be removed. Each cutting remark felt like salt in an old wound, reminding Amara of all the times she'd been denied housing or stared at in public simply because of her skin color and her daughters. She felt utterly alone beneath that vast sky, every effort to comfort Lily reduced to a cruel joke in the eyes of her fellow passengers. "I wish I could just disappear from this flight," Amara thought, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She tried to soothe her daughter, but her own sobs broke through, an anguished sound laced with shame, anger, and helplessness. Feelings only those who've been turned away by the world can truly understand. Trapped in the circle of prejudice, the airplane cabin felt small, yet cold, as if the entire universe had turned its back. Clinging to what little dignity she had left, Amara held her baby close and tried to make herself as small as possible, praying this flight would end soon, and hoping that someone, even just one person, would see her for a real human being rather than a difficult mother. The insults still echoing in her ears, Amara squeezes Lily tight, wishing she could disappear from this cramped row of seats. The idea of slipping into the airplane bathroom, hoping her daughter might quiet down and she might feel less humiliated, lingers in her mind. She quietly loosens the baby carrier, her hand trembling as she tries to stand, but in that very moment a calm, warm voice speaks up right beside her, gentle yet resolute, like a lifeline thrown into a chasm of despair. "Excuse me, would you mind if I tried to help soothe her for a bit?" Amara turns and meets the gaze of the man sitting next to her. James Miller, somewhere in his early 30s with fair skin, neatly trimmed dark brown hair, and a spotless navy suit. He doesn't look tired or annoyed like everyone else. Instead, his eyes hold a softness, a hint of genuine concern and understanding, something Amara hasn't felt from a stranger in months. The air around them is still thick with prejudice and cold indifference. From behind, Mr. Walter squints at them, clearly waiting for the next spectacle he can mock. A blonde woman in the row ahead shoots a skeptical glance, eyebrows raised in a half-smile, as if anticipating the comedic drama of this troubled mother and the chivalrous gentleman. Mrs. Thompson strolls by, casting a warning look over her shoulder, clutching her incident report form, ever ready to document passenger trouble. Amara, in that fraction of a second, feels every pair of eyes drilling into her hands, the very moment she dreads most as a mother, handing her child to a complete stranger, especially when she's been judged and demeaned for her skin color time and again. James's outstretched hand is neither rushed nor forceful. It's simply an invitation for her to rest, if only for a fleeting moment. I've babysat my nieces and nephews before. I might know a few tricks to calm a baby if you'd like to try, he says softly, just loud enough for them to hear. A moment of hesitation. Amara's pride as a single mother stirs in her chest, but exhaustion has worn away her defenses. Lily's eyes are rimmed red. Her crying has dwindled to weak sobs. In that instant, a mother's instinct and a sudden faith in a stranger's good intentions come together. Amara nods and whispers, "Thank you. Honestly, I don't know what else to do." She carefully hands Lily over to James, a mix of relief and nervous anticipation flooding her chest, while around them a few skeptical glances still linger. Mr. Walters sniffs, sneering. "Look at this. Another knight in shining armor." But James doesn't seem to notice or care. He takes Lily with practiced gentleness, resting her against his shoulder, and begins to pat her back in slow, rhythmic strokes, quietly humming a classic lullaby low enough that only he and the baby can hear. For a few moments, no one in the cabin dares to even exhale loudly. Amara grips the armrest, anxious yet hopeful. For the first time since boarding this fateful flight, she feels she's not entirely alone in this cold, unfamiliar world. And at that moment, subtle changes begin to ripple through the space. The atmosphere in the cabin, which had felt so heavy and suffocating, suddenly shifted. The moment James cradled Lily in his arms, and with a few gentle pats on her back and his warm lullaby, the miracle happened. Lily stopped crying. She nestled her head against James's shoulder, tiny hands gripping the hem of his expensive vest, her lips pressing together as her eyes fluttered closed, finding a peace Amara hadn't dared hope for since the flight began. The change was so immediate that everyone looked up in surprise. Mr. Walter, poised to deliver another snide remark, froze. His eyes widened, and he let out a low, incredulous groan. Mrs. Thompson, walking past, paused briefly, her expression a mix of astonishment and admiration as she glanced at James, then looked at Amara with a softness that public service stress had long since erased from her face. Passengers who had been recording or scowling now regarded James differently, some with genuine surprise, others even smiling and nodding approvingly, as though witnessing a small miracle midair. An elderly couple in the row ahead leaned toward each other and whispered, "If only everyone knew how to calm a baby like that." Amara sat still, breath caught in her throat, her heart finally coming down from the emotional storm. She watched James's every motion, his patience in his touch, the rare tenderness from a stranger. His vest, now damp with Lily's tears and the remnants of her pacifier drool, didn't seem to bother him in the slightest. He looked at Lily as if she were the most precious thing in the world, his full attention and unwavering patience evident with each soft note of his lullaby. A classical melody so gentle it felt like warmth cutting through the night's chill. Amara's feelings were a mix of gratitude and wonder. A well-dressed white man she didn't know, who made no judgments about her skin color or situation, showed up exactly when she was about to collapse. Was it luck, or just a fragile twist of fate in an unfamiliar sky? Behind her, Mr. Walter continued to shoot sidelong glances, his face reflecting silent resentment and envy. In that moment, he had nothing left to criticize. Mrs. Thompson passed by again, pausing to offer James a subtle nod before leaning in to say quietly, "Thank you, that was impressive." No one could see the storm raging inside Amara. She felt soothed, yet also small and vulnerable in the face of unexpected kindness. Above all, she felt a silent question. Why did he appear at that precise moment? Why help her? a single black mother, among hundreds of people who would rather turn away or pass judgment. The cabin settled into a new, gentle quiet. But for Amara, this miracle wasn't just that Lily had finally stopped crying. It was that for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone in the vast darkness. In the soft, pale green glow of the cabin lights, with Lily now sleeping peacefully in James's arms, the air around Amara felt as if it had just passed through a fierce storm and come out calmer on the other side. She leaned back into her seat and closed her eyes for a few seconds to steady herself, realizing that for the first time since boarding this flight, she could truly breathe. The murmurs around her quieted, their sharp edge dulled. The stares that had drilled into her moments ago now shifted to curiosity or simply glanced away. James continued to cradle Lily with gentle pats, a satisfied gleam in his eyes as he watched the baby sleep. He made no hurry to return her, just looked up at Amara and quietly asked, "Your daughter is so sweet. Are you two heading to Chicago to visit family?" His voice was low and warm, entirely devoid of judgment or pity, just genuine concern, as though he wanted to create a little space where Amara could simply be herself. At first, Amara stayed guarded. She was used to insincere small talk, used to polite curiosity that always hid a layer of condescension or prying. She answered tersely, "My sister is getting married. We haven't seen each other in a long time." James nodded but didn't press further, smiling gently. That steady patience and calmness made Amara feel safer than any words of comfort ever could. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable pause, enough for Amara to lower her invisible shields. After a moment, once she was sure no one nearby was paying attention, Amara exhaled deeply, her voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm really sorry for bothering you. I've tried so hard, but everything seems to be working against me. Lily's father left as soon as I told him I was pregnant. I have to juggle 2 jobs sometimes, going entire weeks with almost no sleep, and then I got evicted for being a week late on rent." James listened quietly, not interrupting, not rushing in to offer advice. He just looked at Amara with full understanding. That kind of gaze made her feel like she could keep talking, as if all her weakness, exhaustion, and shame could be shared without fear of judgment. "This flight, I had to save every penny just to buy those tickets. My sister, Jessica, we used to be so close, but 2 years ago we had a huge fight. She didn't approve of me keeping this baby, said I was ruining my life." Amara paused, taking a shuddering breath, her hand trembling as painful memories resurfaced. "My mom passed away. My sister and I barely speak now. I didn't know if I should even come to this wedding, but Lily deserves to know her family at least once." James nodded, his eyes reflecting a quiet sadness, as if he'd felt loneliness and loss himself. "I think you showing up here already took incredible courage," he said softly. "Not everyone can walk that tightrope, overcoming old wounds to hold on to what's left of family." Farther back, Mr. Walter glanced their way again, this time not with hostility, but something different. Maybe surprise, or perhaps a quiet admiration for Amara's resilience. Mrs. Thompson passed by, her expression softened. She gave both James and Amara a small nod, acknowledging the value of patience and compassion. In the dark hush of the cabin, Amara felt her heart grow lighter. She had never shared these things with a stranger before. Yet with James, her vulnerability morphed into courage, her shame into an honest confession. Under the cover of night, she found an unexpected ally. Outside, the plane still surged toward the horizon. Inside this small cabin, a life that had felt so lost was, for the first time, finding a sliver of warmth and comfort from someone she never would have expected. The gentle warmth of understanding between Amara and James didn't last long, for the more Amara looked, the more she noticed the nearly insurmountable differences between them. As the cabin lights dimmed, small details became more obvious. The silver watch gleaming on James's wrist, the sharp tailoring of his suit, even the faint trace of expensive cologne that accompanied his every movement. Things Amara had only ever glimpsed through shop windows, never touched. James spoke with an unusual confidence, his voice steady and measured, neither rushed nor awkward, like someone meeting a stranger for the first time. He shared little anecdotes about his nephew, his business trip to Europe, the time he tried a pastry at a French restaurant that was okay, but not nearly as good as my sister's pancakes. All natural conversation, but the more Amara listened, the more she felt out of place in this completely foreign world. She caught Mr. Walter's eyes flicking their way again, now tinged with judgment, as if he wondered how a man like James could be patient and kind to someone like her. In that glance, Mr. Walter perceived a contradiction. A wealthy gentleman and a troublesome mother, and couldn't suppress a mocking smirk as though waiting for the grand finale of some heart-warming spectacle. Amara, sensitive to the layers of meaning behind people's stares, felt her self-doubt deepen. She looked away and asked softly, as though checking whether the growing gap she felt was real. "Actually, I'm guessing you don't often fly coach, right?" James raised an eyebrow, his smile genuine, yet hinting at something he wouldn't fully reveal. "Sometimes I like to try being just another passenger, to remind myself how fortunate I am. Here, I feel more connected to real life." But rather than comforting Amara, that answer only made the chasm between their worlds feel wider. For her, coach wasn't a choice, but everything she could afford. For James, it was merely an experience. For the first time, Amara retracted her hand as it brushed against a worn spot on her coat pocket, telling herself not to dream of anything beyond her reach. Mrs. Thompson walked by again, her expression slightly softened, but still throwing a reminder glance. "Don't forget your place." In the row ahead, a blonde woman discreetly turned on her phone, likely to record the scene of a single black mother being helped by a white gentleman on a plane. Amara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She leaned forward, pretending to straighten Lily's blanket, but really just avoiding everyone's gaze. Anxious, ashamed, her young mother's pride felt upended and tormented. Even for a single night, even in that brief moment of warmth, she couldn't shake the feeling that she would always be an outsider, even when seated among so many people. Outside the window, thick black clouds raced by, while within Amara a silent storm rose, drowning the faint glimmer of hope she had just found on that freezingly long night. Dark storm clouds churned outside the window, while inside the cabin, Amara tried to bury her unease, forcing herself to stay alert despite the alien discomfort and shame. But the harder she fought it, the heavier her eyelids grew. Her body, exhausted from so many sleepless nights, felt every muscle crying out for rest. She watched Lily sleeping soundly in James's arms, gratitude and confusion twisting in her chest, as her heart ached with the realization that she had revealed too much vulnerability to a stranger and to the relentless stares around her. Just as Amara hesitated between fatigue and the fear of letting down her guard, James turned to her. His voice was gentle but firm, as if extending a heartfelt invitation. "If you want to catch a few winks, I'll watch her for you. I'm fine. Please, rest." That simple offer felt like a cool spring in a desert, and Amara nearly cried from emotion. But in that same moment she felt more eyes closing in. Mr. Walter slowly shook his head, his gaze full of disbelief. Mrs. Thompson glanced over, brow furrowed, torn between duty and sympathy. The blonde woman above whispered to her neighbor, her eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and mockery, as though waiting for the naive mother and the strange man to spark some scandalous scene. In that instant, Amara heard every beat of her own heart. The primal fear of handing her child to a stranger, haunted by past traumas of exploitation, judgment, betrayal, enveloped her like a dense fog. But when she looked into James's eyes, all her defenses, all the doubts and suspicions she'd carried dissolved. There was no hint of desire or pity in his gaze, no sense of doing her a favor because he felt superior. Instead, she saw only sincerity, a calmness that invited trust. Amara nodded quietly, her voice so soft she barely recognized it. "Yes, I think I just need a moment." She sat still for a few seconds, waiting to see if her maternal instincts would sound an alarm. But her body was too spent, her lids heavy, her mind drifting between reality and dreams. It wasn't that Amara completely trusted him, but for the first time in months she allowed herself a moment of weakness, giving herself permission to lean on another person. When Amara gently rested her head on James's shoulder, all her defenses crumbled. The cabin's chatter faded into the background, and the prying eyes around her lost their significance. In the hush of that midnight flight, Amara Johnson, the mother who had endured countless sleepless nights and been relegated to society's margins, fell into a peaceful, light sleep for the first time, as if all her burdens had been left behind. Perhaps it was the smallest gift she had received since becoming a mother, but also the most precious, a moment of safety and warmth not defined by the cold judgments of the world. The short but deep sleep left Amara waking up with a strange, dreamlike feeling, neither entirely real nor completely imagined. The first light of dawn filtered through the narrow window, illuminating the tear-streaked lines on her face. In that moment, she realized her head was still resting on James's shoulder, and Lily was still peacefully asleep in his arms. Awareness rushed over her, bringing panic mixed with confusion. She bolted upright, hastily straightening her blouse, trying to create distance from the stranger she had just trusted more than anyone else in the past year. James showed no sign of being unsettled by Amara's panic. He simply smiled gently and carefully handed Lily back to her mother, saying quietly, "She slept beautifully. You should rest more, Amara." Before Amara could figure out whether to thank him or apologize, Mrs. Thompson walked by, paused to give a subtle nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of the power of patience and kindness. But across from them, Mr. Walter couldn't hide his skeptical, curious stare, muttering something under his breath to the passenger next to him, likely about this strange relationship between a black mother and an elegant white gentleman. The plane was descending, and the cabin buzzed with passengers preparing to get up. Amara lowered her head, her heart weighed down by equal parts shame and gratitude. She wanted to disappear as quickly as possible, yet she couldn't forget that brief moment of peace. Just as she rummaged through her bag to gather her things, James leaned over and pulled a small cream-colored business card from his jacket pocket, placing it in her hand. "If you need any help, please don't hesitate to reach out. I mean that sincerely." Amara stared, stunned, at the embossed lettering on the thick cardstock. James Miller, CEO, Miller Foundation. Beneath that was his personal phone number and the address of his Chicago office. In an instant, all the scattered pieces of last night snapped into place. She recalled images of a young philanthropist she'd seen on TV, projects supporting single mothers, news articles praising a charitable foundation that had lifted hundreds of families out of poverty, photos of ribbon-cutting ceremonies with hundreds of young mothers. All of it flashed clearly before her eyes. She felt dizzy, forgetting her surroundings. This was not just a kind gentleman on an overnight flight. James Miller was the very man countless struggling women had hoped to meet in person. Yet here he was, among the scornful, judgmental stares, patiently listening, sharing, and caring for her daughter without a second thought. "You're James Miller?" Amara blurted, clutching the business card so tightly her knuckles whitened, her emotions a whirlwind of gratitude, confusion, shock, and an undefined fear she couldn't quite name. James only nodded softly, a hint of sheepishness in his smile, his eyes warm yet distant. "I just wanted you to see James as a normal person before knowing what I do." His words left Amara both touched and embarrassed, even more flustered by the curious looks around her. Behind her, Mr. Walter watched the exchange, a knowing smirk tugging at his lips, as though silently thinking, "So, even good deeds come with a backstory." Amara looked back at James, business card in hand, and a nagging question began to stir in her mind. Was all this genuine help simply a small part of a larger charitable project, of which she had unknowingly become an example? Outside the window, the sun was rising, blasting light onto two lives that had crossed paths in what seemed like a random moment, but was actually the start of a whirlwind change Amara had never dared to imagine. The shock still simmered in Amara's chest as she followed the stream of passengers off the plane, Lily nestled in her arms, the business card still bulging in her pocket. O'Hare Airport was blazing with lights and announcements, but to Amara, everything shattered into vague, echoing noise. Up ahead, James walked with her toward the baggage claim area. He was on a work call, his tone suddenly sharp and unyielding. "I need the file on the single mother housing program reviewed thoroughly. These aren't just cold numbers. They're real people with real lives that need help." Hearing phrases like single mother housing, file review, and underserved community echoed in Amara's mind like warning bells. She began to feel that all the concern, kindness, and even last night's comforting embrace had been part of a script. She was just one more case study for James's charitable work. Her sense of exposure and microscopic scrutiny grew when she realized several onlookers were curiously glancing at her and James. A middle-aged woman standing near the baggage carousel stared at them with equal parts admiration for James and discomfort, fascinated by that black mother holding a mixed-race baby being escorted by a famous CEO. Heat rushed to Amara's cheeks. She heard Mr. Walter behind her, speaking more loudly than usual, loud enough for passers-by to hear. "There you go. Rich people always have a motive. Even calming a baby is just PR for his next project." Those words were like salt in Amara's already fragile pride. Suddenly, every doubt, insecurity, and hurt she'd carried along life's journey surged back more intensely than ever. She turned to James, her face taut with tension. "So, it was all just an act? You want me to be a poster child for your single mothers overcoming hardship program? Or did you just pick me because I fit your charity's target profile, a black mother with a mixed-race baby crying in coach?" James froze for a moment, his face darkening. He lowered his phone, eyes wide with shock. "Amara, it's not like that, But Amara wouldn't let him finish, her voice cracking with offense. "Did you help me out of pity? Or because I make a good headline for the press? Or was this concern all about making yourself look good?" Beside her, Mr. Walter curled his lips into a smug smile and whispered to the person next to him, "See? In the end, the truth always comes out." Passers-by paused to watch, their curiosity, judgment, and even malice focusing on Amara, making her want to vanish more than ever. Mrs. Thompson walked by, frowning at Amara, her look a silent, I told you not to trust strangers." James stepped forward, trying to speak quietly, but Amara pulled Lily closer, retreating as if to build an invisible barrier between their two worlds, once again, consumed by the feeling of being used and belittled. "What do you get from all this, James Miller? A heartwarming photo in the paper? A perfect PR story? You expect me to be grateful to you forever?" The tense air round them grew heavier than ever. James looked at Amara, pain evident in his eyes, but at that moment, any attempt at explanation felt pointless to Amara. Her pride, dignity, and hurt had coalesced into a wave that swept away the fragile trust she had begun to build over the course of the night flight. The airport already felt icy, but now its chill seeped deep into Amara's bones, reminding her of one undeniable truth. In the eyes of so many, she was just another pitiful example in someone else's pre-written story. The atmosphere in the airport terminal felt dense and suffocating, every sound and movement blurring into a haze, leaving only Amara's rapid breathing and the pain in her eyes. Yet, across from her, James did not retreat as everyone expected. He looked deeply into her eyes, his gaze urgent but trembling, and spoke in a low, resonant voice that cut through the storm of suspicion and hurt. "Amara, please just hear me out, just once." There was such sincerity in James's tone that a few passers-by paused. Mr. Walter stood with his arms crossed, his skeptical expression betraying a hidden hope that James would flip or make a failed excuse, almost as if he were waiting for the so-called philanthropist to be exposed as a fraud in front of everyone. James lowered his voice, his eyes no longer the calm of the CEO people saw on television but filled with raw emotion. His voice cracked and his words were thick with grief. "My mother was an immigrant from South America. She came to this country with nothing but hope and me. My father left when I was only 7. From that moment, my mother worked round the clock. By day, sewing in a garment factory. By night, cleaning offices. Sometimes she'd only get 2 hours of sleep before going back to work." James's eyes glistened with distant memories. "We used to live in a damp apartment, a freezing winter where we couldn't afford to fix the heater. Once I got a high fever, and my mother had to sell her last bracelet to buy me medicine. We went hungry more than once, and the neighbors looked at us with a mix of pity and judgment because she was a single woman of color raising a white child. I grew up in the shadow of injustice and isolation, always feeling like I was an exception, a burden on the world." James clenched his hands, his throat tightening around the next words. "I've never told anyone this except my mother. All my life, I wanted to grow up fast so I could protect her, so I wouldn't have to see her crying alone at night because she was exhausted, because she got turned away from a job, because the neighbors whispered about the immigrant mother and her white child." Mr. Walter, who had been standing there with a mocking smirk, suddenly looked uneasy, his face softening into embarrassment. Mrs. Thompson also paused nearby, her eyes growing gentle in the quiet. James looked back at Amara, revealing a vulnerability she had never seen before, tears welling in his blue eyes. "When I experienced my first bit of success, the only thing I wanted was to make my mother proud. But she didn't live long enough to see who I became. I founded the Miller Foundation, not for publicity, not for praise, and certainly not to compensate for any guilt about my wealth. I do it because I understand deeply how helpless, lonely, and sidelined a single mother and an unprotected child can feel every single day." He took a slow step closer, lowering his voice so only Amara could hear. "I didn't help you out of pity, Amara. I helped because I was once that child sitting quietly in the corner, wishing someone would be kind enough to reach out to my mother. I don't want any child to grow up with that feeling, and I don't want any mother to think she has to fight the world alone." Silence enveloped the entire stretch of the terminal hallway. The judgmental stares of onlookers softened. Mr. Walter quietly turned away as if wanting to escape his own reflection, and Mrs. Thompson placed a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder in a silent gesture of solidarity. Amara looked at James for a long moment, finally seeing the real pain behind his composed, polished exterior. His sincerity, his loss, the memory of poverty, and his longing to protect his loved ones, all of it could not have been some staged PR event. Tears overflowed as Amara held Lily tightly to her chest, her pride and hurt still very much present, but beginning to crack open under something profound. An empathy so deep that only those who have been abandoned and have fought their circumstances with all their blood and tears could truly understand. James's anguished confession replayed in Amara's mind for 2 days afterward, like a wound that wouldn't heal. Yet, when the creaky motel door clicked shut, the outside world shut out Amara and Lily entirely, leaving only her and a whirlwind of suffocating thoughts. The tiny room reeked of mildew and cheap bleach. Its fogged window looked out onto a parking lot stained with oil and scattered trash. Amara gently laid Lily on the rickety bed. Her daughter's eyes, wide and uncertain in this unfamiliar place, breaking into tears in the cold of night. Amara leaned against the wall, clutching the hem of her worn dress, her mind torn between two worlds, one filled with shame and insecurity, the other clinging to a fragile hope kindled by James's childhood story. Sometimes, Amara pictured James standing in that airport hallway, tears glistening in his eyes as he spoke of his immigrant mother's lonely courage. For the first time, she saw reflections of herself in him, a man who had overcome fear and shame, only to be pushed away by her own stubborn pride. But when night fell, she felt right back at square one. Lily's cries could not be soothed, and each time Amara caught her reflection in the mirror, she grew more lost. Mr. Walter's mocking laughter, Mrs. Thompson's cold glances, and even the curious pity of strangers at the airport all clung to her like indelible shadows. In the center of the room, the old wooden table radiated a faint warmth. Amara carefully spread out her faded navy dress, smoothing the wrinkles and ensuring the hastily repaired seams from months ago wouldn't show. It was the only dress she had ever worn to job interviews, the one she'd worn at her mother's funeral. And tomorrow, it would be the dress she wore to her older sister's wedding, the sister who had once rejected her. Tears streamed down Amara's face, each salty drop falling onto the threadbare collar. She thought back on the choices she had made, choosing to be a single mother despite everyone's disapproval, choosing to go far from home to build a life alone, choosing to believe in kindness despite being hurt so many times. And now, when someone finally truly understood her, Amara found herself turning away, driven by her fear of being hurt again, by the lingering shame of someone abandoned by the world. Lily's cry pulled her back to reality. Amara scooped her into her arms, softly rocking her in rhythm that seemed out of place amid the motel's cacophony. In the darkness, she whispered apologies to her daughter, to herself, and to James, knowing that no one could hear her. Loneliness surged like an undertow, pulling Amara under in that cramped room where even her own shadow on the wall looked distorted and weary. That night, filled with the scent of mildew and a sorrow that felt endless, Amara realized she could forgive the past, or anyone else, but not herself. The night spent tossing and turning amid the mildew smell left Amara almost sleepless. When the first pale rays of morning crept through the old curtains, a gentle knock sounded at the door, pulling her from the heavy fog of her thoughts. Heart pounding, Amara carried Lily to the door, not expecting to face anyone else while still raw and exhausted. Standing outside was Jessica. Amara's sister still looked as composed and strong as ever, but her eyes held a mixture of hesitation and sorrow. Jessica's presence brought back a flood of memories, angry fights, painful words they'd hurled at each other without restraint, and months of deliberately ignoring one another during their mother's funeral, and through all the subsequent hardships and loneliness. "Sis," Amara began, surprised and cautious. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her voice caught at first. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but last night I couldn't stop thinking about everything." The two sisters sat on the creaky bed, with Lily placed between them, like a fragile yet powerful bond. The room felt cramped and heavy with unspoken words. Jessica was the first to break the silence. "Amara, 2 years ago, when you told me you were pregnant, I said some awful things. I accused you of being irresponsible. I told you were ruining your life. You know, I really couldn't control my emotions back then." Amara gripped the blanket tightly, eyes downcast, her voice quiet. "You made me believe I was the biggest failure in the world. I tried so hard to prove to you that I could be a mother, but the harder I tried, the deeper I sank into loneliness and exhaustion." Jessica burst into tears, the first time she showed such vulnerability to her sister. "You didn't know. At that time, I was trying to have a baby, too. Mark and I tried everything, but we kept failing. When I heard you were pregnant, I was so jealous I felt like I'd go insane. Then, 2 weeks after our fight, I found out I was pregnant, but I lost it in less than a month. I was heartbroken, but instead of coming to you, I poured all my anger and blame on you, thinking you had something I could never have." Amara was stunned. All the resentment and anger that had built up over 2 years suddenly dissolved in an instant, because on the other side of her pain, Jessica had also suffered, felt lonely and powerless. They sat there, two women who seemed strong, now leaning on each other and crying uncontrollably. Lily, sensing the change in the atmosphere, stopped fussing and lay quietly in Amara's arms, her big, round eyes looking up at the adults with an innocent, unburdened gaze. Jessica wiped her tears and took Amara's hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'm so sorry, Amara. I was just a failure hiding behind a facade of success. If I could go back, I'd tell you, I've always been proud of you. You fought on your own, you had the courage to keep Lily, and you faced this whole world even when no one stood up for you." The tiny motel room suddenly felt warm in the morning light. What remained after all the pain and blame was truth and sisterly love, buried under layers of shame, now rising stronger than ever. Those tears today were no longer tears of loneliness, but tears of forgiveness, healing, and the start of a new chapter, when Amara realized that only by being honest and courageous enough to face pain in the past can a person truly grow. The early sunlight streamed through the cloudy glass, illuminating the tear-streaked faces of Amara and Jessica. After all the words of forgiveness, the small room fell into a rare stillness and peace. With Lily asleep on her lap, Jessica picked up a smartphone and opened a series of missed calls and messages. "James has been looking for you all these past 2 days, Amara," Jessica said gently, looking straight at her sister. "He called me last night, and more than that, he even came to my office to ask about you." Amara blinked in surprise. Over the last 2 days, she had been punishing herself with guilt, refusing to answer any unknown calls out of fear of questions about James, about how she had driven away the only person who had ever truly cared. But she had never expected his persistence in finding her. Jessica scooted closer and opened an article on her phone, handing it to Amara. "Read this. It's an interview about James's mother." Amara read each line quietly. Beneath an old photograph was a somber brown-skinned woman with determined eyes, captioned, "Mrs. Maria Alvarez Miller, founder of the first support programs for single mothers in Chicago." The article detailed her journey through poverty, prejudice, and loss, an immigrant woman raising a white child alone amid skeptical, isolating stares. James had been that boy in a cold apartment, watching his mother work every job she could find, laundering, cleaning, selling goods at night markets, just so her son would not have to endure the same injustices she had. Jessica talked with James for a long time, Jessica continued. He didn't mention the charity foundation, didn't talk about housing programs, didn't boast about success or money. He spoke only of you, of Lily, of how bravely you fought for your daughter, of your loneliness in this world, and how for the first time in many years he realized what it truly means to care for someone. A trace of confusion still flickered in Amara's eyes. She hesitated. "I still can't believe someone like him, wealthy, famous, could care for a single mother with a scarred past like mine. I'm afraid it's all just pity." Jessica shook her head, squeezing her sister's hand tightly. "Do you know what James told me? He said you reminded him why his mother started it all. Not to receive charity or be rescued, but to stand on her own, to love and be loved as an ordinary person. James doesn't need your gratitude. He only wants you to open your heart one more time. Not because of the past or how perfectly you fit someone's narrative, but because of who you are today." Amara looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her arms. The memory of James's sincere gaze, his warm voice, and each story about his mother washed over her. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder. If she dared to step forward, could happiness truly be waiting? Or would she lose something precious again because she was afraid of being hurt and ashamed? Jessica seemed to read her thoughts and offered an encouraging smile. "You deserve to be loved, Amara. Don't let your insecurities decide the rest of your life. Happiness doesn't come from pity, but from having the courage to accept it." The noise in the hallway, the morning light on her faded dress, Lily's steady breathing, all urged Amara to make a choice for herself, for her daughter, and for her own chance at life. Tonight there would be a wedding, a celebration of reunion, and perhaps a new chapter would begin if she dared to open her heart once more, stepping out of her old shell of insecurity and shame to reach what her heart had longed for, to be seen and loved as her true self. The doubts and inner turmoil that had weighed on Amara all day finally gave way to a vague sense of resolve, though she still could hardly believe she had the strength to go through with it. As dusk fell, Amara slipped into the emerald evening gown Jessica had lent her. It fit shockingly well, making her feel different from any other day, more confident, more feminine, as if the burdens of those lonely years had finally fallen behind her. Lily was safely in the hands of the hotel's caregiver, sleeping soundly in a kind, older woman's arms. Amara lingered in the hallway in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting her hair and trying to calm the flutter of nerves in her chest. Each step she took on the carpeted corridor sounded like a reminder to keep moving forward, that she could no longer let shame dictate her future or her daughter's. When the grand doors swung open, Amara froze at the sight of the sparkling ballroom. Beneath crystal chandeliers, the room was suffused with white flower arrangements, the soft glow of candles and gentle music drifting through the air. Jessica shone in her pure white wedding gown, dancing radiantly with her new husband, while guests laughed and chatted, many glancing her way in admiration at how stunning Amara looked. But all Amara could see was James, standing quietly in a distant corner, almost separate from the revelry. His perfectly tailored black tuxedo lent him a composed, mature air, but it was his eyes that truly drew her in. They were fixed on the entrance, brimming with hope and trembling with anxiety. When their gazes met across the crowd and glittering lights, every fear, every hesitation, and every critical whisper out there seemed to vanish. Amara no longer heard the murmurs or felt the scrutinizing stares of anyone else. The distance between them closed gradually as James took careful, determined steps toward her. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He drew in a deep breath himself, his blue eyes shining with sincerity and regret. "I'm sorry for hiding who I am. I didn't want you to think my concern was out of duty or pity. But I was wrong not to be honest with you from the start. The truth is, the moment you rested Lily on my shoulder, I knew my life would never be the same." All eyes turned toward them. Behind him, Mr. Walter, who had once criticized and mocked Amara, now looked stunned, awkward. Mrs. Thompson, who had been impatient before, watched quietly, her gaze softened and touched. Guests whispered among themselves, half curious, half admiring. Some recognized James as the famous CEO, while others simply saw in him and Amara a rare, genuine connection that transcended ordinary expectations. James stepped closer, gently taking Amara's hand. His voice wavered but stayed firm. "Amara, I love you not because you need help, and certainly not because I want to save anyone. I love you because of your strength, because you never gave up even when life pushed you back, because you reminded me of my mother and what truly matters in life. I want to build a real family, not as part of a project or some feel-good story for the media, but because from this moment on, I only want to live honestly with my heart, by your side and Lily's." In that instant, under the warm glow of the chandeliers, all barriers and biases, every critical glance from the past melted away. There were just two people who had finally found each other after so many trials. Tears welled in Amara's eyes as she squeezed James's hand, unable to hide her emotion. The ballroom seemed to fall into a hush, as though witnessing a kind of miracle, a moment when courage, love, and truth were laid bare without any need for pretense or flashy spectacle. It was the moment when every wound, every agony in Amara's heart began to heal, when she realized that sometimes the greatest happiness comes from letting go of fear and opening one's heart to the love that's truly meant for you. The moment James's hand tightened around mine, all the sounds in the ballroom seemed to fade into the background, giving way to a soft whisper echoing from deep within my heart. Every insecurity, every layer of self-protection that I, an experienced single black mother, had built up, vanished like smoke as James knelt, looked straight into my eyes and whispered, "I love you, Amara. Will you let me become part of this family?" Tears streamed down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of pure joy. There was no trace of past wounds, no scar of shame, and none of the cruel whispers from others. Through my tears, I smiled and nodded, whispering back, "I do." Suddenly, applause erupted throughout the ballroom, not loud or chaotic, but heartfelt and filled with admiration. Jessica stood in her groom's arms, silently wiping away her own tears. Mr. Walter, who had once criticized me, bowed his head in approval, his eyes softening in embarrassment. Mrs. Thompson, the woman who had once been so wary, smiled now, offering a warm, quiet smile as someone who has witnessed life's harshest moments. James gently pulled me into his arms, wrapping me in a warmth and certainty that felt like a promise to protect and cherish not only me, but also Lily, who was asleep up on the nursery floor, completely unaware that, starting tonight, her life would have a foundation both strong and tender. Before all these witnesses, James whispered, "From now on, we are a family. I will love you and Lily for the rest of my life." I looked around the room and saw in every eye a mixture of emotion, admiration, and understanding. The walls of prejudice that had once separated me from the world, from the scornful glances on that airplane, the whispers at the airport, to my sister's distance and even my own doubt, had completely crumbled in the face of compassion, love, and forgiveness. Together, we danced beneath the glowing crystal chandeliers, lost in the gentle music and surrounded by well-wishes from friends and family. I felt my heartbeat, light and peaceful, like I had finally escaped a long nightmare and found my dawn at last. Upstairs, Lily slept soundly in the caregiver's arms, a slight smile on her face as though she sensed the new happiness flowing into her little life. In that moment, I knew that from now on, my daughter and I had a true home, a place without boundaries of skin color, without the weight of past shame, only trust and love powerful enough to heal every scar and turn the simplest moments into pure magic. Looking at James, I realized the life lesson I'd been taught. Only by having the courage to rise above prejudice, fear, and self-doubt can we truly open our hearts to receive happiness. And happiness doesn't always begin with grand gestures. It often starts with one small act, a sincere sharing, a compassionate gaze in the midst of life's hustle. As we danced in the warm glow of the ballroom, we began a new chapter, one of love, family, and people brave enough to break down every barrier to be together. This is the magical journey of Amara, Lily, and James, a story not only of love, but of the power to overcome prejudice, forgiveness, courage, and the longing for happiness, just like anyone else. From cold, shame-filled nights to the warm reunion beneath wedding lights, we proved that real miracles often start with a simple gesture, a hug, an empathetic word, and above all, the courage to open one's heart. And you, do you believe that love and empathy can help us overcome every social barrier, whether it's skin color, circumstance, or a painful past? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you find this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share with friends, and subscribe to the channel to continue following more inspiring stories.